The rain in London does not wash things clean. It merely makes the grime slicker. It was November 14th, 1963, a Thursday that felt like a Tuesday, heavy with the kind of damp cold that seeps through wool coats and settles into the marrow. The city was still waking up, the fog rolling off the Thames and wrapping around the street lamps of Kensington like gauze around a wound. Inside St. Jude's Hospital, the air smelled of floor wax and antiseptic, a scent that Dr. Julian Thorne had long ago ceased to notice. Before we step into the sterile, fluorescent-lit world of Dr. Thorne and the needle prick that would unravel a geopolitical knot, if you enjoy these deep dives into the hidden conflicts of the Cold War and the ordinary people caught in its gears, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring these forgotten archives to light. Dr. Julian Thorne was a man of precise habits. He was 42 years old, the chief of hematology at St. Jude's, and he possessed the kind of quiet, unassuming intelligence that is often mistaken for dullness. He wore rimless glasses, kept his fingernails aggressively short, and viewed the human circulatory system not as a biological function, but as a complex hydraulic architecture. To Thorne, blood was not a symbol of life or violence. It was data. It was a carrier of secrets: oxygen, iron, sugar, and history. At 7:45 a.m., Thorne was in his office on the 3rd floor, reviewing the inventory logs for the blood bank. The hospital's supply of O-negative was running low, a perennial problem that irritated him more than the impending budget cuts or the hospital board's constant demands for efficiency. He was just reaching for his tea, brewed for exactly 4 minutes, when the red phone on his desk rang. It was the emergency intake nurse, her voice pitched an octave higher than usual. "Dr. Thorne, we have a trauma incoming. Police escort. They're asking for you specifically." Thorne frowned, adjusting his glasses. "I am a hematologist, nurse. Unless they have a blood disease, they need a surgeon." "They have surgeons, doctor. But the patient, the police say he's a diplomat. There's a massive laceration to the femoral artery. He's lost a significant volume. The cross-match is coming up strange. The lab technicians are confused." Confusion in a laboratory was something Thorne could not abide. "I'll be down in 3 minutes." When Thorne arrived at the trauma bay, the scene was a controlled chaos that he had witnessed 1,000 times. Yet this time, the frequency of the room felt different. There were too many men in suits. 2 uniformed constables stood by the swinging doors, but inside, hovering near the walls, were 3 men in trench coats who were distinctly not police. They had the hard, watchful eyes of men who carried authority in their pockets like a badge. The patient lay on the gurney, a pale, unconscious figure surrounded by a swarm of nurses and residents. He was a man in his late 30s, handsome in a sharp, angular way, with dark hair plastered to his forehead by sweat and rain. His suit, now cut away by the trauma team, was expensive: Savile row tailoring, heavy wool, silk lining. "Status?" Thorne barked, stepping into the circle. Dr. Evans, the lead trauma surgeon, looked up, relief washing over his masked face. "BP is 60/40. Pulse is thready at 120. We've clamped the artery, but he's dry, Julian. He needs volume immediately. We started him on saline and plasma, but he needs packed red cells. Now." "The nurse said there was an issue with the cross-match," Thorne said, moving to the head of the bed, checking the patient's eyes. Pupils were reactive but sluggish. "The slide agglutinated," a technician said, holding up a clipboard. "He typed as A positive initially, but when we mixed it with the donor serum, it clumped. We tried a second batch, same thing. It's behaving like he has a high titer cold agglutinin, but the room is warm." Thorne looked at the patient's arm. The skin was alabaster white, the veins collapsed. "Name?" "Arthur Sterling." One of the men in trench coats spoke up. He stepped forward, blocking the light. "He is a trade attaché with the Canadian delegation. He was involved in a collision on Cromwell Road. It is imperative that he receives the best care." "Imperative." Thorne looked at the man. The accent was flat, mid-Atlantic, the kind practiced in boarding schools and diplomatic receptions. "If you want him to have the best care, step back and let me look at his blood. If we give him the wrong type, his kidneys will fail and he will die, regardless of his diplomatic status." The man hesitated, then stepped back. Thorne turned to the technician. "Bring me the samples, and get me 2 units of O-negative low titer." We'll skip the cross match if we have to, but I want to see that slide first. As the team worked to stabilize Arthur Sterling, Thorne took the glass slide to the microscope in the corner of the trauma bay. He adjusted the focus, the blurred red shapes sharpening into distinct cells. What he saw made him pause. The agglutination, the clumping of the red blood cells, was not the chaotic clustering of a mismatch. It was a distinct rouleau formation like stacks of coins. It wasn't just a reaction to the serum. The patient's blood itself looked stressed. There were irregularities in the cell walls, tiny deformations that shouldn't be present in a healthy man of 38. It looked like the blood of someone who had been exposed to long-term heavy metal toxicity, or perhaps someone who had survived a significant bout of radiation sickness years ago. "Doctor?" Evans called out. "We're losing him." Thorne made a decision. "Push the O negative. It's a risk, but we have no choice. Run it through a warmer and draw me 3 more tubes. I want a full panel. Coombs test, antibody screen, and check for heavy metals." "Heavy metals?" Evans asked, already hanging the bag of dark red blood. "Just do it," Thorne said, staring at the unconscious face of Arthur Sterling. The man looked peaceful, almost serene, unaware that his own biology was whispering secrets that his expensive suit tried to hide. Thorne felt a prickle of unease at the base of his neck. In London, in 1963, trade attachés did not typically have the blood pathology of a uranium miner. As the dark red fluid began to flow into Arthur Sterling's arm, the machine monitoring his heart rate beeped a steady rhythmic cadence. The immediate crisis was passing, but for Dr. Julian Thorne, the mystery was just beginning. He didn't know it yet, but the man on the table was a ghost, a construct, and the blood entering his veins was about to start a war inside his body that would be reflected in the streets of London. Recovery rooms are places of suspended time. The urgency of the trauma bay fades into the rhythmic hiss of ventilators and the soft squeak of rubber shoes on linoleum. Arthur Sterling had survived the initial transfusion. The O-negative blood had done its job, carrying oxygen to his starving tissues, pulling him back from the gray threshold of shock. But Dr. Thorne was not celebrating. He was in the main laboratory, 3 floors up, staring at a series of test tubes that defied logic. It was 2 p.m. The rain had not stopped. Thorne had missed lunch, a disruption to his routine that usually made him irritable. But today he felt nothing but a cold, intellectual dread. On the desk in front of him lay Arthur Sterling's wallet, which the hospital administrator had catalogued, a Canadian driving license issued in Ottawa, a membership card for a squash club in Kensington, a photo of a smiling woman and a small boy in front of a distinctly North American suburban house. It was a perfect pocket-sized biography. "It doesn't make sense, Julian," said Dr. Sarah Prentice, the hospital's senior pathologist. She was a sharp-witted woman who smoked slim cigarettes in the lab when no one was looking. She was looking at the same results Thorne was. "The Coombs test is positive, direct and indirect. But look at the antibody specificity." Thorne nodded. "Anti-Di-A." "Exactly." Prentice exhaled smoke away from the samples. "Diego antigen. It's incredibly rare in Caucasians. It's found almost exclusively in indigenous populations of the Americas or East Asians." "Arthur Sterling is a white male," Thorne said, picking up the driving license. "Born in Toronto, according to his intake forms. Parents of British descent." "Well, biology doesn't lie," Prentice said, tapping the paper. "Either Arthur Sterling has a grandmother he doesn't know about who was Native American, or this blood doesn't belong to a man of purely Anglo-Saxon heritage. But that's not the weirdest part." "I know," Thorne said quietly. "The scar tissue." During the examination, after the bleeding had been stopped, Thorne had inspected the patient's body for other injuries. He had found them. Tiny, almost invisible white lines on the inside of the elbow and near the groin. They weren't from drug use. The tracks were too precise, too healed. They looked like surgical scars from repeated deep tissue biopsies or perhaps inoculations. "We ran the heavy metal panel you asked for," Prentice continued, her voice lowering. "Lead is normal, mercury is normal, but look at the strontium levels." Thorne looked. The numbers were elevated. Not lethal, not enough to cause acute sickness, but they were there. Strontium 90. a radioactive isotope that mimics calcium and settles in the bones. This is the signature of the fallout era, Prentice said. We see this sometimes in kids who grew up drinking milk during the testing years. But these levels? This is high for a Canadian. This looks like someone who lived downwind of a test site. A big one. Thorne took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Nevada? Maybe, Prentice shrugged. Or maybe he's just unlucky. But combined with the Diego antigen, it's a statistical anomaly. It's a 1 in a million profile. Thorne stood up and walked to the window. The street below was a blur of black umbrellas. The men who brought him in, they're hovering. They've practically set up a command post in the waiting room. They claim they are his colleagues from the High Commission. Diplomats worry about their own, Prentice said. They worry about secrets, Thorne corrected. I need to talk to him. Is he awake? The nurse said he was stirring 10 minutes ago. Thorne gathered the file. The discrepancy between the man's paper identity, Arthur Sterling, Toronto-born diplomat, squash player, and his biological reality, a carrier of a rare genetic marker and radioactive isotopes, was a jagged edge in Thorne's mind. He couldn't leave it alone. It was the same compulsion that made him organize his books by height and color. Things had to fit, and Arthur Sterling did not fit. When Thorne entered the private recovery room, the air was thick with the smell of flowers that had arrived too quickly. A large bouquet of lilies sat on the bedside table. Sitting in a chair by the window, reading a newspaper, was one of the trenchcoat men. He looked up sharply as Thorne entered. Doctor, is he fully conscious? He is waking up, Thorne said, keeping his voice professional. I need to examine him, alone. Hospital policy for post-transfusion assessment. The man narrowed his eyes. I have orders to stay with him, and I have a duty of care to ensure he doesn't go into anaphylactic shock, Thorne lied smoothly. Unless you have a medical degree, you are in the way. 5 minutes. The man hesitated, glanced at the sleeping figure in the bed, and then stood up. 5 minutes. I'll be right outside the door. When the door clicked shut, Thorne moved to the bedside. Arthur Sterling's eyes fluttered open. They were gray, clouded with morphine, but as they focused on Thorne, something sharp appeared behind the haze, a distinct, practiced clarity. Mr. Sterling, Thorne said softly, I'm Dr. Thorne. You're at St. Jude's. You were in an accident. Accident? Sterling's voice was a rasp. He tried to move, winced, and settled back. The car, the truck, came out of nowhere. You lost a lot of blood, Thorne said, watching the man's face closely. We had to give you a transfusion. You're O negative. Sterling paused. It was a microsecond delay, a glitch in the software of his reaction. Yes, of course, O negative. That's fortunate, Thorne said, moving to check the IV line. Because if you were anything else, we might have had trouble. Your antibody screen was unusual. Sterling's gaze hardened. The grogginess seemed to evaporate, replaced by a tense vigilance. Unusual? I've never had problems before. Appendectomy in '54. Toronto General. No issues. Thorne noted the detail. A specific surgery, a specific year, a specific hospital. It was a well-rehearsed medical legend. Appendectomy. Right side? Yes. We saw the scar. It healed well. Thorne paused. We also noticed the other marks, on your inner arms. Sterling's heart rate monitor accelerated slightly. Beep, 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 beep. I had childhood eczema, severe treatments. It left marks. Eczema, Thorne repeated. And the Diego antigen? The genetic marker in your blood that suggests you aren't exactly the Anglo-Canadian your passport claims? The room went silent, save for the monitor. Sterling looked at Thorne, and for a moment, the mask slipped. It wasn't fear Thorne saw, it was calculation. The man was assessing Thorne not as a doctor, but as a threat level. Doctors find all sorts of anomalies, Sterling said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Biology is messy, isn't it, doctor? Sometimes it's best not to look too closely at the mess. You might find things that complicate the diagnosis. I don't like complications, Thorne said. I like clarity. Your blood has high levels of strontium-90, Mr. Sterling, the kind you get from living near a nuclear breach. Now, Toronto is a lovely city, but I don't recall any nuclear disasters there in the last 20 years. Sterling smiled, a thin, tight expression. "You are very thorough." "I am careful." "Be careful then," Sterling said, and the threat was unmistakable. "My colleagues outside, they are very grateful for your work. They would hate to see anything happen to a doctor who saved a diplomat's life." Gratitude can be overwhelming. Thorne straightened up. He had his answer. The man in the bed was lying about everything. But why? And what did a radioactive, rare-blooded man pretending to be a Canadian have to do with the Soviet embassy 2 streets away? "Rest, mister." "Sterling," Thorne said. "We'll monitor your levels." As Thorne turned to leave, Sterling spoke one last time. "Doctor, the lilies. Could you move them closer? They remind me of home." Thorne looked at the flowers. "Lilies don't grow well in Toronto this time of year." "No," Sterling said, closing his eyes. "They don't. The hospital at night transforms. The corridors stretch longer, the shadows deepen, and the silence has a texture." By 8 p.m., and the day staff had gone home, leaving the skeleton crew to manage the wards. Dr. Thorne should have been among those leaving. His flat in Chelsea was waiting, his books, his records, his routine. But he was still in his office, the door locked, the blinds drawn. On his desk sat 3 vials of blood, Arthur Sterling's blood. Thorne knew he was crossing a line. To run unauthorized tests on a patient's sample was a breach of ethics. To investigate a patient's background was a breach of privacy. But the conversation in the recovery room had rattled him. Be careful. It was the way Sterling had said it. Polite, civilized, and utterly lethal. Thorne pulled a medical textbook from his shelf, a heavy volume on global epidemiology and hematological variants. He flipped to the section on the Diego antigen. Distribution, high frequency in South American tribes, Japanese, Chinese, absent in pure European populations. He then pulled a map of the Soviet Union from his lower drawer. It was an old map, pre-war, but the geography hadn't changed, only the names. He traced the line of the Ural Mountains. He circled the city of Chelyabinsk. In 1957, there had been rumors, whispers in the scientific community about a massive radiological event in the Urals. The Soviets had denied it. The West had suspected it, but had no proof. The Kishtim disaster. If a child had been there, exposed to the fallout, their bones would carry the strontium marker forever. And the Diego antigen? Thorne remembered reading a translated paper in a niche medical journal about population displacements under Stalin. Entire ethnic groups from the Soviet Far East, Koreans and indigenous Siberians, moved forcibly to Central Asia and the Urals for labor. If Arthur Sterling was a child of that displacement, a mix of Russian and East Asian genetics, raised in the shadow of a secret nuclear city, his blood told a story of suffering that no Canadian cover story could mask. Thorne needed more proof. He needed to see the blood react again. He went down to the lab. The night technician, a young man named Colin, was dozing over a crossword puzzle. "Dr. Thorne?" Colin jumped up, knocking his tea. "I thought you left." "I forgot to run a titration on the trauma patient," Thorne said, keeping his face neutral. "I'll do it myself." "Go get a coffee, Colin. Take 20 minutes." Colin didn't argue. Once he was gone, Thorne took Sterling's sample and placed it in the centrifuge. He spun it down, separating the plasma from the cells. He was looking for something specific now, not a genetic marker, but a chemical one. If Sterling was a high-value Soviet agent, as Thorne suspected, he might be on prophylactic medication. The KGB was known to use proprietary stimulants and immune boosters for their operatives, compounds that didn't exist in the British pharmacopoeia. Thorne ran a chromatography test. It was a slow process, the liquid inching up the paper, separating into bands of color. He waited, watching the clock. 10 minutes. 15. The door to the lab creaked open. Thorne froze. He hadn't heard footsteps. "Working late, Julian?" It was Dr. Evans, the surgeon. He was wearing his coat, ready to leave, but he was standing in the doorway, looking at Thorne with a curious expression. "Just finishing up," Thorne said, his heart hammering against his ribs. "The Sterling case. I want to be sure he's stable." Evans walked into the room. "You're obsessed with him. The administrators are asking questions. The men in the suits are asking questions. They want to move him to a private clinic tomorrow. He's not stable enough to move, Thorne said quickly. He's at risk of a delayed hemolytic reaction. They don't care. Evans leaned against the bench, too close to the chromatography strip. They have their own doctors. Julian, leave it alone. The man is a diplomat. If he has weird blood, he has weird blood. It's not our job to solve riddles. It's our job to patch them up and send them out. Evans looked down at the test strip. What are you testing for? Thorne moved his hand, casually covering the strip. Electrolytes, making sure his potassium isn't spiking. Evans stared at him for a long moment. Thorne realized then that Evans wasn't just a tired surgeon. He was nervous. His eyes were darting to the door. Just be careful, Julian, Evans said, echoing Sterling's words. Don't dig holes you can't climb out of. Evans turned and left. Thorne waited until the footsteps faded before looking at the strip. There was a band of color, a distinct, bright blue line that shouldn't be there. It wasn't an electrolyte. It wasn't any antibiotic or painkiller used in St. Jude's. It was a match for a compound Thorne had seen only once before, in a confidential briefing from the Ministry of Defense regarding foreign substances found in defectors. It was a synthetic adrenaline analog, used to keep agents awake and focused for days at a time. It was strictly Soviet military issue. Thorne had the smoking gun. Arthur Sterling was not Canadian. He was a Soviet asset, likely a sleeper agent or an active operative, physically modified and chemically enhanced. And he was lying in bed 304, guarded by men who would kill to keep that secret. Thorne pocketed the test strip. He couldn't trust Evans. He couldn't trust the hospital administration. He was alone. The next morning, Friday, the rain had turned to a drizzle. The hospital was buzzing with activity, but around room 304 there was a stillness. The men in trench coats had been replaced by a single woman. She was striking. Blonde hair pulled back in a severe chignon, a tailored gray suit, and eyes that were the color of slate. She sat by Sterling's bed, holding his hand. To a casual observer, she was a worried wife or sister. To Thorne, watching from the nurse's station, she looked like a hawk perched on a fence post. Thorne approached the room with his clipboard. The woman looked up. Her smile was practiced, exposing teeth but no warmth. "Dr. Thorne," she said. Her English was flawless, better than Sterling's. "I am Margaret, Arthur's fiancée. I flew in from Ottawa as soon as I heard." "That was a fast flight," Thorne said. "He was only admitted yesterday morning." "I was in Paris on business," she countered effortlessly. "Arthur tells me you saved his life." "We did what was necessary." Thorne moved to the other side of the bed. Sterling looked better. The color had returned to his cheeks, but the tension in his jaw remained. "Margaret wants to transfer me," Sterling said, looking at Thorne. "To a facility closer to the High Commission. They have a medical wing." "I've advised against it," Thorne said, checking the chart. "Your blood counts are stabilizing, but you're not out of the woods. A transfer could trigger a stress response." "We are willing to take that risk," Margaret said, standing up. She was tall, almost as tall as Thorne. "We have an ambulance arranged for noon." Thorne looked at the clock. It was 10 a.m. He had 2 hours. If they took Sterling, he would vanish. The anomaly in his blood would be erased, the evidence buried. And whatever mission Sterling was here for, whatever reason a Soviet agent was posing as a diplomat in London, would continue. "I need to run one final test," Thorne said. "A standard procedure before release. If it clears, I will sign the discharge papers." Margaret studied him. She was assessing him, just as Sterling had. "What kind of test?" "A liver function test, to ensure the anesthetic hasn't caused toxicity. It takes 40 minutes. "Fine," Margaret said. 40 minutes. But doctor, do not delay us unnecessarily. Arthur has important work to get back to." "I'm sure he does," Thorne said. He left the room and walked straight to the elevator. He didn't go to the lab. He went to the basement, to the records archive. He needed a phone that wasn't monitored by the hospital switchboard. There was a payphone near the boiler room, used by the custodial staff. Thorne dialed a number he hadn't used in 10 years. It belonged to a man named David Hilliard. They had been at Oxford together. Hilliard had studied classics, but after the war, he had vanished into the dull-sounding civil service. Thorne knew, through the grapevine of university alumni, that Hilliard now worked in a nondescript building near Regent's Park that housed a branch of MI5. The phone rang 4 times. Yes? A dry voice. David, it's Julian Thorne. A pause. Julian, good God. It's been a decade. Is everything all right? No, Thorne said, keeping his voice low, pressed against the brick wall. I have a patient, admitted yesterday, trauma, car crash, claims to be Canadian diplomatic staff. And his blood is wrong, David. Genetic markers for East Asian ancestry. Isotope levels consistent with a Soviet nuclear disaster site. And I found traces of a synthetic stimulant in his plasma that doesn't exist in the West. The silence on the other end was heavy. You're sure? I'm looking at the chromatography, Thorne said, clutching the strip in his pocket. He's being transferred at noon. A woman, his fiancée, is taking him. She's formidable. David, this man is not a trade attaché. He's KGB. I'd stake my medical license on it. Where are you? St. Jude's, room 304. Stay there, Hilliard said, his voice changing, losing the Oxford drawl and becoming sharp steel. Do not let him leave. Stall them. I can have a team there in 20 minutes. But Julian, if you're wrong, this will be an international incident. I'm not wrong, Thorne said. Just hurry. Thorne hung up. He felt a tremor in his hands. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who liked tea and order. But he had just initiated a counterintelligence operation from a hospital basement. Thorne returned to the 3rd floor. It was 10:20 a.m. He needed to buy time. 40 minutes wasn't enough if Hilliard got stuck in traffic. He went to the nurse's station. Nurse Miller, page doctor. Evans to the ER stat. And then call the blood bank. Tell them we need another unit of O- for room 304 immediately. Is Mr. Sterling hemorrhaging again? Miller asked, alarmed. No, but his hematocrit is dropping. Thorne lied. It's a slow leak, internal. We need to prep for a possible transfusion. He was creating a medical emergency. It was dangerous, reckless, but it was the only way to keep Sterling in the bed. Thorne walked back into room 304. Margaret was packing Sterling's few personal items into a bag. Sterling was sitting up, looking pale. There's a problem, Thorne announced. Your latest blood draw shows a drop in hemoglobin. You're bleeding internally, Mr. Sterling. Margaret froze. That's impossible. He feels fine. Adrenaline is a powerful masker of symptoms, Thorne said, looking at her pointedly. We need to do another transfusion. Immediately. You cannot move him. Sterling looked at Margaret. A silent communication passed between them, a flicker of suspicion. We will handle the transfusion at our facility, Margaret said coldly. Get the discharge papers. If you move him now, he will go into hypovolemic shock in the ambulance, Thorne said, raising his voice slightly. He will die on the way. Is that what you want? Is he more useful to you dead? It was a gamble. He was challenging her handling of the asset. Margaret stepped close to Thorne. She smelled of expensive perfume and stale tobacco. You are becoming an obstruction doctor. I am being a doctor. Thorne stood his ground. I have ordered the blood. It's on its way. Give me 30 minutes to stabilize him, then you can take him. She glared at him, searching his face for deceit. Thorne summoned every ounce of his professional detachment, hiding the terror that was clawing at his gut. 30 minutes, she hissed, and not a second more. She turned to the window, looking down at the street. She was checking for surveillance. Thorne moved to the bedside to check the IV. He leaned close to Sterling. She doesn't care if you live, you know, Thorne whispered, barely moving his lips. To her, you're just a package. If you're damaged goods, the KGB retires people, don't they? Usually permanently. Sterling's eyes snapped to Thorne's. For the first time, there was genuine fear there. The man knew exactly what failure meant in his world. I can help you, Thorne whispered, but you have to stay in this bed. You don't know what you're doing, Sterling breathed back. You're a civilian. You're playing with fire. I know your blood type is rare, Thorne said. I know about Chelyabinsk. I know about the amphetamines. I know you're not Arthur. Who are you? Sterling didn't answer, but his heart rate monitor jumped. Beep, 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 beep. Margaret turned around. Why is his heart rate up? Pain, Thorne said smoothly. I'll administer a mild sedative. He injected a saline flush, just salt water, into the IV port. There, that should help. 10:40 a.m., 20 minutes to go. Where was Hilliard? 10:50 a.m. The hospital intercom chimed. Dr. Thorne to administration. Dr. Thorne to administration. Thorne ignored it. He was standing in the doorway of room 304, a physical barrier between the patient and the exit. Margaret was pacing. She checked her watch every 30 seconds. The ambulance is here. We are leaving. The blood hasn't finished infusing. Thorne pointed to the bag of saline he had hung, pretending it was plasma. Unhook it, Margaret ordered. She reached into her handbag. Thorne saw the metallic glint of something that wasn't a compact mirror. A small, suppressed pistol. The reality of the Cold War crashed into the mundane sterility of St. Jude's. This woman was going to shoot him in a London hospital room. Margaret, don't, Sterling said from the bed. His voice was weak. The stress was actually affecting him now. Not here. Too many witnesses. He knows, Margaret said in Russian. It was a slip, a break in discipline born of desperation. Thorne understood the tone, if not the words. He raised his hands. I'm just a doctor. I don't care about your politics. I care about my patient. You are a liar, Margaret said, switching back to English. She leveled the gun at him, hidden partially by her coat. Move. Thorne didn't move. He couldn't. His legs felt like lead, but his mind was racing. If she shot him, the noise, even suppressed, would draw attention. But she would do it. She had the eyes of a fanatic. Suddenly, the elevator doors down the hall dinged. Heavy footsteps echoed on the linoleum, not the squeak of medical shoes, the hard clack of leather soles. Margaret's head snapped toward the sound. Police! A voice shouted. Armed police! Drop the weapon! It wasn't just police. It was a tactical team. Hilliard had come through. Margaret didn't drop the gun. She grabbed Sterling by the collar of his hospital gown, hauling him up. Get up! She screamed. He can't walk! Thorne shouted, diving to the side as Margaret fired. Phut! The bullet shattered the glass vase of lilies. Water and flowers exploded across the room. Thorne scrambled behind the heavy medical cart. Back off! Margaret yelled, dragging Sterling off the bed. The IV line ripped out, spraying blood across the sheets. Real blood this time. Sterling groaned, his legs buckling. The police were at the door now, weapons drawn. Let him go! Nowhere to run! Margaret looked at the window. It was 3 stories up. No escape. She looked at the door, blocked by armed men. She looked at Sterling, who was sagging in her grip, bleeding from his arm. A look of cold resignation crossed her face. If she couldn't extract the asset, she had to sanitize the scene. She turned the gun not on the police, but on Sterling. No! Thorne yelled. He threw the metal tray from the cart. It was a pathetic projectile, a stainless steel kidney dish, but it clattered loudly, startling her. The fraction of a second was enough. A marksman from the hallway fired. Margaret jerked back, her shoulder exploding in red. She dropped the gun and collapsed, screaming in rage. Sterling fell to the floor, gasping. Thorne scrambled over to him, ignoring the shouting police, ignoring the blood on the floor. He pressed his hand over the bleeding IV site on Sterling's arm. I told you, Thorne panted, looking down at the KGB agent. I told you not to leave the bed. Sterling looked up at him, pain and shock washing over his features. You, he whispered. You are a very stubborn man, Doctor. Hilliard walked into the room, stepping over the debris. He looked at Margaret, who was being handcuffed, and then at Thorne. You called it close, Julian, Hilliard said. I had 40 minutes, Thorne said, his hands shaking as the adrenaline crash hit him. You took 35. Traffic, Hilliard said dryly. He looked down at Sterling. Well, Mr. Arthur Sterling, or should I say Colonel Nikolai Volkov, we have a lot to discuss. And thanks to the good doctor here, you're going to live long enough to tell us everything. Thorne sat back on his heels, his white coat stained with the blood of a man who didn't exist. The rain outside was finally stopping, but the storm inside his life had just begun.